Well, good evening, everyone. My clock is saying it's 1 minute past 6, so perhaps we shall begin. I think there are a few more of you coming through the virtual door as we speak, but welcome to Norfolk Wildlife Trust's AGM. It's our 95th AGM, and this year, of course, it is online. And it's also the first to be live from Ashwell Thorpe Woods, where the sun is still shining, as you can see. A lovely scene. We each of us have a lovely backdrop this evening. Sadly, we aren't in Ashwell Thorpe Woods. We're in our respective homes, I guess. So let me introduce myself. I'm Patrick Barkham. I'm the president of Norfolk Wildlife Trust. It's a great honour to be president, and this is my first year presenting the AGM. And with me on the panel tonight are Alice Liddell, who of course is chair of trustees, and Lindsay Whiteman, who of course is our treasurer, and Elliot Lyon, who is our chief executive. And you will be hearing from all of us over the course of the next fun-packed hour and a half, I should think. So this online AGM is a new way of doing things for all of us, and we currently have, I'm just looking down at the numbers there, 60 of you have joined us. I think that number may rise as the evening progresses, so thank you very much for joining us this evening. And we'll be recording the AGM so that it can be watched again by any of our members, and this will be posted at a later date on our website, so you can go through the whole thing again if you've enjoyed it so much. And let me also introduce My Voice, who are running the elections tonight. My Voice are an independent elections provider, and they're assisting the trust with voting at tonight's AGM, and they're ensuring independent scrutiny of that process. If you have any technical issues, you can email support@myvoice, that's mi-voice.com, and I'm going to just put that in the chat now. Let's see if I can multitask. I'm going to send this to everyone, so hopefully you can see that in the chat. If you're not so familiar with Zoom, I'm sure most of us are these days, if you go to the bottom of your screen, you'll see in the middle there the chat button, and you can access the chat there. That's also a way to correspond with us later on. So if you have any questions tonight for any of us, but obviously particularly Elliot and Alice, then we are having at least 15 minutes of questions. We've had some questions sent in already, but please feel free to add more questions as the night progresses in that chat box, and I will go through them and put those questions to Alice and Elliot. So with regards to voting, I'll say some of this again, so don't worry too much about it. But can I ask members who will be voting today to make sure they have connected to the My Voice voting platform via the link that has been sent to you on email? I'm a member too, and I've been sent that link, so I'll be voting later as well. Please note that given the virtual format and the method of voting, we will confirm whether the vote has passed later in the meeting. And the voting platform is open now, so you can vote now at any time. You can vote on the resolutions, or you can vote when I read out the resolutions later during the formal part of the meeting. If you are attending tonight's meeting, but you have previously voted or appointed a proxy to vote on your behalf, you won't be able to vote again during this meeting. That's one of the wonders of technology. So tonight's timetable, we have some formal business, we have a film, and we're aiming to finish, it'll probably be about 7:45. We're going to start with the formal business, and so please do have a look at the agenda. I'm sure many of you, I don't think my background will quite show it, but anyway, we'll have that in front of you, the paper agenda that we've all been sent through the post, and that will include a presentation from our treasurer, and we'll also go through the 10 resolutions that we can all vote on tonight. And then we'll continue with more informal business. We're going to have short speeches from myself and from Alice and Elliot, all on slightly different themes relating to the Trust's work. And we've got the award of the Sydney Long Medal for 2022. And we will have questions, as I mentioned earlier. We've got some already, but please do add questions in the chat box too. And then we're saving, as is customary at these AGMs, we're saving the best bit until last, which is a talk from Jake Fines, who I'm sure many of you know. He's conservation director at the Holcombe Estate. He's really enthused the whole country with wildlife friendly farming. He's written a book called Land Healer. He's really transformed things at Holcombe, and he's been described as the Gordon Ramsay of conservation. And so hopefully he won't be too expletive strewn tonight, but he's going to show us some nice pictures and have a chat, and I'll ask him some questions. And again, you feel free to ask Jake some questions at the end, and I will read those out. Again, you can put those in the chat box and I'll read those out at the end. Jake is currently racing back from London. He's a man in demand at the moment. He sits on virtually every environmental committee in the country, and he's running slightly late, but he's hoping to be with us by about 7:15. So the Jake bit of the evening will run from 7:15 to about 7:45. And so we'll have time for a little tea break after all the formal business is concluded. Right, so on with the formal business. And so we begin with a presentation by our treasurer, Lindsay Whiteman. So I will hand you over to Lindsay. Lindsay, away you go. The floor is yours.
Lovely. Thank you, Patrick. In support of Resolution 2, I would like to summarise the accounts for the year to 31st of March 2022. Starting with income. Income for the year to 31st of March 2022 was 5.9 million, a decrease on the previous year of circa 1.3 million. This decrease is largely due to the exceptional 1.5 million donation received in the previous year. We are, however, extremely grateful for the near on 1 million of legacy income received during the year, the majority of which has been designated to fulfil long-term strategic objectives. Similar to the previous year, 1.4 million of agri-environmental grant income was received. Other grant income included over 225,000 from the National Lottery Heritage Fund and a release of 88,000 from our Futures Fund. Expenditure for the year to 31st of March 2022 was 5.6 million. This included spend on charitable activities of 3.7 million, fundraising and publicity spend of 464,000, and membership servicing costs of 237,000. This means that for every £1 spent by the Trust, 84p related directly to activities which is comparable to other charities of a similar size. The result for the year was a net income of 419,000. With regards to the subsidiaries, after a difficult couple of trading years, Norfolk Wildlife Services increased its turnover and reported a profit of 51,000. Norfolk Wildlife Enterprises also saw an increase in turnover, resulting in a profit of 26,000. Looking at the balance sheet, total net assets as at 31st of March 2022 totaled 25.2 million, which is growth of 419,000 on the previous year. 13.5 million of this relates to land and property. The Trust investments were valued at nearly 3.5 million at year end, an increase in value of 142,000. There was also a large decrease in debtors in the year relating to receipts of grant monies owed to the Trust. It is also important to touch on the financial impacts of COVID-19 during this financial year for the Trust. Impacts of COVID-19 continued to be felt during the year to 31st of March 2022, but to a much reduced extent to the prior year. The Trust has been well managed financially and has available reserves. However, we will continue to monitor the operational and financial impacts of the pandemic. If you have any questions, please do add these to the chat function. Thank you. I'll now hand back over to Patrick.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you very much. Now, on to the voting. I'm going to repeat what I said earlier, just because it's obviously the kind of most important part of tonight. And then I'm going to read out all the resolutions one by one. You can vote at any time from now and from earlier in the meeting. There will be a cut-off point. So once I've finished reading all the resolutions, there is then going to be, we're going to watch a nice film about Sweetbriar Marshes, which is an 8-minute film. And you've basically got kind of 10 minutes after I finish reading the resolutions to complete your voting. So just to go over it again, because I know it's all a new thing, and I'm going to be fiddling around with my laptop like probably you will too. So we need to make sure as members that we've connected to the My Voice voting platform via the link which has been sent to you via email, and that's also just been put in the webinar chat just now too. And so Obviously, many of you will have this open already, and you can vote on the resolutions now. We're kind of inviting you to vote on those, but you've still got 10 minutes after I've read all the resolutions. So I'm now going to read the voting items on today's agenda. So item 1, to confirm the minutes of the annual general meeting held on 14th of October 2021. That's resolution 1. Resolution 2 is to receive the report of council and approve the report and audited financial statements for the year ending 31st of March 2022. That's resolution 2. Resolution 3 is to reappoint Larkin Gowan LLP as the Trust's auditors and authorise council to determine their remuneration. That's resolution 3. Resolutions 4 to 10 are about the re-election and the election of members to our council. So resolution 4 is to re-elect Alice Liddle. Resolution 5 is to re-elect Andy Clark. Resolution 6 is to re-elect Scott Pinching. Resolution 7 is to elect Greg Beaton. Resolution 8 is to elect Kirsty David. Resolution 9 is to elect Ross Jolliffe. And resolution 10 is to elect Mark Little. Now, I'm sure you probably have the details in front of you from your AGM sheet, but just to confirm, there are 4 vacancies on council this year and 7 candidates have been nominated. They all look fantastic candidates to me, and we're really grateful that they've put their names forward. And obviously that's going to be a tricky thing for everyone voting on those. But so that's what we're voting on, resolutions 1 to 10. And if you're not voting now, you can still do so. You can carry on voting while we move on. And we are now going to watch a lovely film about Sweetbriar Marshes, which of course is Norfolk Wildlife Trust's very exciting acquisition in central West Norwich as part of that lovely green ribbon of the River Wensum running into Norwich. And this is going to be 8 minutes long, and voting is still open whilst this film goes on. And shortly after the film finishes, voting will then close, and we'll obviously have the results a bit later on this evening. So I hopefully we can tee up that film for you now.
In the UK, nature conservation has traditionally followed a model of nature reserves, which are privately owned by nature conservation organisations or by private individuals. But at Norfolk Wildlife Trust, in partnership with Aviva and with the community of Norwich and of Norfolk, we're experimenting with a new model of nature reserve, which has the community right at its heart, here in the centre of Norwich. In 2020, Sweetbriar Marshes came up for sale. This is a site of 90 acres between Sweetbriar Industrial Estate and the Dereham Road in the city of Norwich. It's of crucial importance for wildlife, both because of the species and habitats found here, and because it sits along the River Wensum, Norfolk's longest and most connected biological corridor. Crucially, it's also a green space for the people of Norwich, who have long had a relationship with this wonderful site. So at Norfolk Wildlife Trust, we became interested in purchasing the site, but simultaneously, local community groups have long been campaigning for it to be protected as a nature reserve. Lucy Galvin and Liam Calvert, local community leaders, pick up the story. How long have you had a relationship with Sweetbriar Marshes?
About 20 years, I think, or more even. Since we first moved to Norwich, it was one of the places we discovered.
So when it first came up for sale, it was a mixture of concern and a realisation that it was an opportunity, wasn't it? So it was an opportunity if the right buyer came to purchase it, and it was a concern if the wrong purchaser came along. As it is, it's very nice, but it's not looked after, it doesn't have public access.
We're part of the Marlpit Community Centre and the Wensum Community Centre. And also Friends of Trainwood and Marriott's Way and other local groups. So we went to those groups really and asked them. Pretty soon people just said yes and started to get involved. So that was the really gratifying thing about it, was the response from people early on. We could see there was a real desire from people.
We'd really like to see that it's a thriving reserve with community participation and the right balance of community access. It should be a showcase for the city.
To purchase the site, Norfolk Wildlife Trust launched a public appeal, but we did so in partnership with historic Norwich company Aviva, who agreed to match fund every pound donated up to the value of £300,000. This was crucial in unlocking the generosity of the people of Norwich and Norfolk and further afield. Ben, you're Chief Innovation Officer at Aviva, and Aviva has a long history of generosity and support towards Norfolk Wildlife Trust. Explain some of the context for your recent support of our acquisition.
Absolutely. So we have a long history in the city of Norwich. Aviva's been there for over 220 years, and we're really proud of that history and that heritage, and we want to effect positive change in the communities where we're based, supporting local people, our colleagues, our partners, where they live and work.
And the background for this is Aviva's sustainability ambition and your recent biodiversity policy.
Absolutely, Nick. Our sustainability ambition is all about acting on climate change now and supporting local communities. And what a wonderful space to encourage biodiversity and really put resilience of our communities at the heart of what we're doing.
But really, it's just the beginning of a partnership with community, with Norfolk Wildlife Trust, with the people of Norwich, that will see Aviva further involved in the development of Sweetbriar Marshes.
Absolutely, and we're really excited about that relationship and extending it. We've been partners for over 10 years and thousands of people have come to volunteer, and we'd love to encourage more volunteering in this amazing space.
Well, on behalf of Norfolk Wildlife Trust, on behalf of the biodiversity of this amazing place and the surrounding communities, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Our appeal was a tremendous success, the fastest ever in Norfolk Wildlife Trust history. Sweetbriar Marshes already has enormous importance for wildlife, but it has the potential to be better for wildlife and for local people. Nature Conservation Manager Steve Collin explained to me what happens next.
There's such a variety of habitats. We've got woodland, we've got scrub habitats, we've also got some very dry, acid grasslands that transition into wet grasslands. We're studying the different communities of plants so we know what is where, so therefore we know how to treat it in the future. In the marsh areas we've got southern marsh orchid and early marsh orchid. We've also got up on the dry slopes common spotted orchid. In wet areas we've got things like water voles. I believe there's otter on the river down there as well.
But Norfolk Wildlife Trust's vision for Sweetbriar Marshes is not just about wildlife, it's also about people, about the local community. And the Chief Executive, Elliot Lyne, told me more. Elliot, I'm hearing robins and I've just heard a green woodpecker and there's common cats here flowering and the dead seed heads of wild carrot, but this is a site that's important for wildlife, but it's not just important for wildlife.
That's right, Nick. It is important for wildlife. That's one of our key missions as an organisation, but it's equally important for the people of Norwich. This is an opportunity for us and for the people of Norwich to work together to create a space together that really allows people to connect with nature in a way maybe they haven't had the opportunity to before.
In terms of engagement, in terms of partnership, what ideas are you throwing around for the delivery of Sweetbriar Marshes?
It's a really interesting question, and I'm tempted not to throw too many ideas around just at this point, because we need to listen to understand the communities that are around us. So we've got to understand their needs, their desires for this space, and really work with that, and then I think layer our ideas on top of that.
So in a sense we're going into a period of listening rather than projecting ideas. And in the context of the history of Norfolk Wildlife Trust and Norfolk Wildlife Trust's future ambition, how does Sweetbriar Marshes fit in?
It fits in absolutely perfectly because it has both elements of what we're thinking about in terms of our new vision and strategy. It has the acquisition of land, which is core to the organisation, always has been, always will be, but also it layers on top of that connection with nature, the importance of getting people connected with nature, perhaps people who we haven't otherwise talked to before, who don't typically come to a nature reserve, and this gives us a perfect opportunity to do that.
So this is an exciting time in the history and the future of Norfolk Wildlife Trust.
I hope so. I hope it's a time we'll reflect back on and think that was the start of something really special.
I think people want to be part of local nature. They want to see what's on their doorstep and actually look after it, and I think that's what the Wildlife Trust can do here. Actually engage people in managing it themselves.
In the past couple of years of momentous global events, we've all become aware of the value of nature in our daily lives. So at Norfolk Wildlife Trust, we are excited to begin the journey of helping Sweetbriar Marshes become a nature reserve for the people of Norwich and of Norfolk. But it's not a journey that we want to take alone. If you would like to support our continued work here, please donate. But if you are a family, a local group, a school who would like to help us shape the future of Sweetbriar Marshes, then please get in touch.
Isn't that great? What a lovely video. Isn't Nick Aitchison, our ambassador, brilliant? He's such a fantastic communicator, and I used to live just a few yards away from that site, and I know it, and it's so exciting. And one of the most exciting things, I think there's something crazy like 52 schools within 2 miles of Sweetbriar. So such an amazing opportunity to get children involved with nature. And I personally love Elliot's openness about that space and about not having too many big ideas for it and seeing what the community wants. And Lucy Galvin there in that film has fought so hard for the community around there and for that green space, which could have easily been lost to everyone, and now it's there for everyone. I think it's a lovely example of the very best that Norfolk Wildlife Trust can do. So I noticed one person is having difficulty voting. If anyone else is, please do use that chat function, and Simon at My Voice is sort of sorting things out for you. There are a few more seconds left to vote. I was going to say at this point there's 90 seconds left to vote, but I think we might just leave it open a fraction longer if people are struggling to finish that vote. I'd like to get Roisin there and ensure that she's able to submit her vote. So hopefully that process can happen. So we now have some speeches from Alice and Elliot and myself. And I think first up is Alice, our brilliant chair, who's going to look back, I think, and sort of summarise what Norfolk Wildlife Trust have been doing in recent months. Alice, over to you.
Thank you, Patrick. And I am going to look back, but most of all, I'm going to say thank you. I'm going to say thank you to everyone who's joined us tonight. And first of all, I want to pay tribute to Queen Elizabeth for a life well lived with constancy, devotion and integrity. She was born in 1926, the same year in what is now Norfolk Wildlife Trust was born. And she was our patron for the 70 years of her reign. We were the only one of the 46 wildlife trusts of which she was the patron. It was an honour for Elliot to attend the Queen's funeral last month. And he represented not only Norfolk Wildlife Trust, but all the wildlife trusts when he did so. Our Queen cared deeply about Norfolk, Norfolk's wildlife and wild places, and we feel her loss deeply. Thank you to our many donors, funders, investors, supporters and partners. I hope you know what a huge difference you make to our work and towards realising our vision and aims. We're very grateful for your generosity and support. And a big shout out to our volunteers. Earlier this month, and as a volunteer myself, I attended a Volunteers Away Day. There were about 80 people there, representing only some of the 450 regular volunteers who are registered with us, and that's not counting the many others who've contributed to our work and mission, whether helping in conservation work on sites, receiving visitors at our centres, running the local groups, representing the trusted events, doing beach cleans, leading walks, taking photos, many, many other activities. Without our volunteers, we wouldn't have nearly so much impact as we do. In 2019, pre-pandemic, our volunteers represented about a 30% increase in our workforce. Inevitably, the impact of COVID saw volunteer activity dip, but even in 2021, volunteers contributed nearly 33,000 hours, and we're hoping that this year's figures will show that we're nearly back to pre-pandemic levels. One of my loudest thank yous, of course, is to everyone who works for Norfolk Wildlife Trust. 132 people at the last count, not including 27 seasonal staff. We mustn't forget the impact that such dedicated and expert people have. Our nature conservation team go from strength to strength in striving to make our reserves and the land we manage exemplars of best conservation practice. There are many examples, whether it is the success of the new reed bed at Hickling or the restoration of 7 ghost pingos in the Brecks, which are already showing recolonisation by water beetles and aquatic plant life from neighbouring Thompson Common. But not everything that the reserves teams do hits the headlines. All credit to those who spent their weekend in February after Storm Eunice battered Norfolk, working from Roydon Common to the Broads, assessing sites for wind-blown trees, other dangerous structures, repairing fence lines, and putting livestock back in the right place. Huge teamwork and real technical skill. Our nature recovery team works in the wider landscape. The Trust Claylands project demonstrates the ethos we have about connecting nature and people. This project, centred around 3 hubs in South Norfolk, is focused on providing a connected network of habitats and restoring the fabric of nature, be it by way of woods, trees, ponds or hedges. Some big figures coming up now. The project has seen 2.2 kilometres of new hedging planted, loads of trees with more to come this winter, 22 ponds restored, over 14 hectares of grassland and meadowland either restored or enhanced, 30 training workshops, 15 landowners recruited to the scheme, and work on 5 farms so far. This is very impressive for a project which has an 18-month life and has yet to run its course. The work of our engagement team personifies one of the key aspects of our new strategy, people valuing nature. We want to ensure that people across Norfolk are connected to, inspired by, and take action for nature. The Trust's PR and communications team has been very busy. You won't have missed the news of our campaign against the proposed route of Norwich's Western Link, nor the fact that only a fortnight ago we initiated a coalition of like-minded Norfolk organisations and people who signed a statement challenging the government's plans to change nature and climate laws. But engagement happens on a range of scales, from Norfolk-wide through the community partnership approach which we'll be using at Sweetbriar Marshes, to the very personal. Last month, the New Roots Young Girls Group, Empower Her, visited Norfolk Wildlife Trust's Thorpe Marshes for a walk to collect items for wild art. The feedback was enthusiastic, and a staff member from New Routes commented that one of the girls, who is normally very withdrawn and never speaks to new adults, came out of her shell, asked very many questions, and visibly enjoyed herself. Last year's public appeal to buy Mere Farm to add to our reserve at Thompson Common, and this year's appeal to buy Sweetbriar Marshes, they're headline grabbing, but the development and partnerships team do much more. They nurture you as members, they work with corporate supporters such as Aviva and Greater Anglia, and explore many funding opportunities which result in projects which make a difference for nature. Claylands is one of these. The Next Door Nature scheme is so important for engagement. And the Future Professionals scheme, which we participated in this year, is aimed to stimulate employment in the green economy. This saw 7 recruits joining Norfolk Wildlife Trust to gain valuable experience, ranging from conservation to communications. 2 of those recruits are now employed by the Trust. Underpinning everything I've outlined so far is the work of the Finance Support Services team and the work of the Chief Executive Office. I want to recognise the importance of the work they do to keep our finances straight, our membership records straight, to invest wisely and ethically, to budget for the future, to ensure compliance with Charity Commission and other requirements, to provide IT services, which amongst other things have seen our headquarters made viable for hybrid working, to deal with health and safety, to look after our staff through our human resources team, and to ensure our governance structures are correct and regularly reviewed. And I'd also like to thank our Chief Executive, Hugh R. Elliott. Elliott said that his first year with us has flown by. He celebrated his anniversary towards the end of last month. It's certainly been an extremely busy time, getting to grips with what the Trust is about, for him getting to know people within the Trust, within Norfolk, and within the wider movement. And he's done a lot of listening. With his clear sight and leadership skills, we have a clear strategy and know our direction of travel. I'm glad we recruited you. And then I'm bound to have left people out, but I've just got a couple of very personal thank yous to do. I want to thank those who make the best cheese scones in Norfolk, available at Cley and Holme visitor centres. I want to thank the teams who run our visitor centres, because my Christmas shopping and my reading lists would be nothing without that. I want to thank the boat operators, because one of the favourite things I like doing is going out on a boat trip at Hickling. And I want to thank the receptionists at Buick House, who always greet me so warmly. Thank you to every one of you. Last but by no means least, thank you to you, our members. Last month, at over 37,000 members, we had more members than we've ever had in our 96 years. We're truly grateful for your continued support and commitment. With your backing, we'll continue to work towards a wildlife-rich future for Norfolk. So may I now hand over to Elliott, who will outline how our new strategy has that mission in mind.
I'm
Elliott.
just going to jump in here, Elliott. Sorry to interrupt,
Okay.
but just to confirm that voting is now closed. I believe Simon Thompson, who is one of our My Voice representatives, is helping one specific person sort out their voting issues, and he will obviously then conclude the voting process and ensure it's counted, and then those results will come through to me in about 15 minutes, I think. So sorry to interrupt, Elliott, and on with your speech. Thank you, Alice.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Alice. On behalf of myself, the staff, volunteers and members and supporters of the Trust, I'd like to thank you, Alice, for your leadership this last year. In my first full year at the Trust, you've been incredibly supportive to me and to all of us in giving us the space to make the kind of impact for nature which you've just amply acknowledged. So thank you. When I stood here, not here, but in the hotel that we did our AGM in last year, I was 4 weeks into my role. I talked about some ambitions and thoughts about the future, but I'm really delighted that we've been able to bring some of those into fruition in the last 12 months, as Alice has explained. Most importantly, for the future, we've finalised our new strategy for nature's recovery. It's entitled A Wilder Norfolk. A Wilder Norfolk is based on reflecting on the learnings from our 96 years of experience and on consultation with others as well. We have surveyed our staff, our members, and undertaken broad discussions with our trustees, leadership team, and partner organisations as well. Most importantly, it's a long-term framework designed to stand the test of time. And around it, we'll build evidence-led work for Norfolk's nature, environment, and people, both now and in the future. It's closely aligned to the national strategy of the Wildlife Trust movement, as we firmly believe that we act stronger when we act together. Our new vision, then, of what we want to see in the world is that Norfolk's nature is abundant, thriving, and valued. This is a future in which everyone's life is enriched by nature and everyone in society feels empowered to act on behalf of nature. Wildlife is abundant everywhere, on farms, in towns, in cities, in gardens, along rivers, and on nature reserves. And the future of even the most rarest of species and habitats is secure. It's an unashamedly audacious and bold vision for the future. And to deliver this, we must do two things. We must firstly create more space for nature to thrive, and we've got to inspire more people to take action for nature. So taking these in turn, our first goal then is to create abundant and thriving nature. And we'll start by expanding our reserves, delivering Sidney Long's founding mandate for Norfolk Wildlife Trust. And we aim to increase our owned or managed land by 30% by 2030. But we know that this will not be enough, not nearly enough on its own. So we must work with and through others to bring our vision to life. This means much more work with farmers, with landowners, with communities and councils, and frankly, anyone and everyone who wants to put nature at the heart of their plans for a thriving Norfolk. We'll also increase our capacity to deliver what's called nature-based solutions, things like carbon sequestration, natural flood management, biodiversity net gain, or nutrient neutrality, all buzzwords at the moment, but we would like to develop at least 2 major projects in these areas by 2030. And we're going to commit greater energy and capacity to the conservation of Norfolk's marine environment. Our second goal is that people value nature. Ambitious though it seems, we aim to see 1 in 4 people taking action for nature in Norfolk. Much research indicates that if you get to 1 in 4 people doing something, it creates a social tipping point beyond which people's attitudes in society change. To achieve this, we're going to build on our existing engagement networks. Most importantly, we want to investigate, understand, and break down the barriers that prevent people, and a wider range of people at that, engaging with nature, the environment, and the trust. We have grown in countless ways since our 12 founders, all men, founded Norfolk Naturalist Trust in 1926, but we recognise that there are still many ways in which we can become more relevant and inclusive to the Norfolk of today. Our recent acquisition of Sweetbriar Marshes will be fundamental in this respect. You've heard in that wonderful film how plans for the reserve will be developed in partnership with local communities, especially those who typically maybe enjoy limited access to green space or nature. In order to deliver these bold goals, we've got to transform ourselves as an organisation, to constantly challenge ourselves to be leaders for nature in Norfolk. Our talented, hard-working staff and volunteers must feel empowered to bring their best to their work. We're going to invest then in our people and our processes and our technology, listening carefully to what they tell us they need to unleash their full potential for nature. In June 1931, when Norfolk Wildlife Trust cared for only 3 reserves, Sir William Beach Thomas, a celebrated war correspondent and conservationist, wrote of us in The Spectator. Characteristic areas, the Cly Marshes, Alderfen Fen, the Starch Grass Marsh, have been acquired by acts of great faith and daring, for they were bought before the money for the purchase was in sight. By no means all of it is even yet in sight. These places, we may hope, are only a beginning. For almost a century, with the unfailing support of you, our members, donors, volunteers, trustees, and staff, we have taken such acts of great faith and daring. Our new strategy, A Wilder Norfolk, is the next such act, and it will enable countless more. But it is only the next beginning. With your continued support, we can turn the corner for nature's recovery in Norfolk and create a county where nature is abundant, thriving, and valued. I'm going to now hand over to Patrick Barkham, our president, to talk about the context within which we start our work on this new strategy. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Elliot. Acts of great faith and daring, that's a wonderful resonant phrase, and that's a really inspiring vision, I think, and thank you everyone for contributing to that vision. Just a reminder of where we are. We're going to have the results coming. I'm giving a short address, and then hopefully we'll have the results. If the results aren't quite ready, because we had a few people struggling to vote, so we had to help them out, we'll go for a little bit more with a film about the presentation of this year's Sydney Long Award, and then we will have questions. And so please, this is a reminder to all of you at home. Obviously, you know, we really are interested in hearing from you, and there's the chat box at the bottom of your screen and you can ask questions there. And I see a few. David North has just asked a question. Thank you, David. And Roisin has asked a question. Thank you, Roisin. So do please ask questions there. There are quite a few questions been submitted in advance that mainly Elliot, I think, will answer too. And then we will probably have a short break and hopefully get on to Jake Fines, who's running late but should be with us by 7:15. So that's just a reminder of where we are. I'm going to talk to you very briefly about the wider backdrop in which we're now seeking to protect nature in Norfolk. I don't think we can ever have held a Norfolk Wildlife Trust AGM at a more troubling time for nature. We all know we're facing an entwined crisis of climate change and biodiversity loss, which ultimately threatens all life on Earth. And we're now experiencing this very directly, the impact of climate change and extreme weather here in Norfolk with this summer's drought, and of course the rising sea levels that are eroding our fragile coastline. Drastic changes are coming to the Norfolk coast and the Broads this century, and hopefully many of us will still be alive to see some of those, and some NWT reserves are going to be changed irrevocably. Ultimately, we're now facing a much more immediate environmental crisis caused by our new government, led by South Norfolk MP Liz Truss. Her government has so far said it's going to rip up nature protections, remove funding for regenerative and wildlife friendly farming by scrapping most of the new ELMS farm support scheme. They want to create investment zones with almost no constraints on industrial and housing developments. They want to remove pollution rules and nutrient neutrality rules so that rivers become even more polluted and lifeless. They'd like to start fracking, which at least hopefully won't affect us here in Norfolk. And they want to drill for more oil and gas in the North Sea, while also scrapping biodiversity net gain requirements for new housing. These new policies will have very real impacts right here in Norfolk. An investment zone is proposed for the A11 corridor, which is likely to damage our unique Breckland habitats. The government has promised more money to help build roads, such as the destructive Western Link that's going to cross the Wensum, west of Norwich. I want to be very clear, when I criticise these measures, I'm really not making a party political point. No government in living memory, Labour, Lib Dem Tory coalition, Conservative government, has been very good on the long-term vision that nature requires. Our political system, unfortunately, discourages long-term decision-making. Recent Conservative governments have established some really laudable goals. There's a 25-year plan for nature. It's great. There's a commitment to end biodiversity decline by 2030. That's great too. And the Conservatives have committed the government to devoting 30% of land and sea to nature, which is exactly our aspirations here at Norfolk Wildlife Trust too. And there's a really positive, potentially positive post-Brexit farm subsidy system with public money for public goods, so that farmers are incentivized to provide these public goods like healthy soils, pollinators, clean rivers. And that's part of the ALM system that unfortunately the current Conservative government is now threatening to dismantle. So what can NWT do about this, and what can we all do about this? I'm really proud that the Norfolk Wildlife Trust has been led very much from the front by our Chief Executive, Elliot, and has taken such a strong and leading role in a big coalition of nature charities, but also big society. You know, the Bishop of Norwich has intervened here too, and publicly opposed what nature charities, I think rightly, are calling an attack on nature. Now, I'm sure there may be one or two Norfolk Wildlife Trust members who say we should not be getting all political in inverted commas, and that we should stick to do what we do best and protect nature on our brilliant nature reserves. And I agree with everyone who rightly cherishes our special nature reserves, and I heartily cheer Elliot's new strategy with that commitment to really ambitious commitment to extending our nature reserves, so protecting more land. And clearly this is crucial, and these special places give us so much. But as we know, that's not going to be enough to fix nature in Norfolk. We have to convince the rest of Norfolk, or at least that 25% that Elliot mentioned earlier, to follow our lead and protect more of Norfolk for nature. Beyond government, there is hope. I've seen it myself, I'm sure many of you have. There's really heartening signs amongst the farming community. Many farmers, without any help or encouragement, are discovering for themselves that they need healthy soils and they need invertebrates for healthy farming, are embracing regenerative farming and acting really positively. And so yeah, as Elliot says, we have to work more with farmers and other landowners, and we have to work more to facilitating that environmental education and those hands-on experiences in nature for children, so that we widen the sense that we aren't a species that are becoming ever more detached from nature. And we have to work with other partners, from the NHS to house builders. We have to be pragmatic and provide expert advice, help them manage land in more nature-friendly ways, but also be critical friends. So I really do believe that we can criticise Norfolk County Council for the Western Link, but we can also hopefully help and advise them to be more nature friendly in many of their other practices. What can we as individuals do? In dark times, I think we all find solace in simply enjoying nature and our brilliant reserves, and making a difference locally is probably the most meaningful thing we can do. And I know most of you, all of you, are already doing loads, and we thank you for that. And many of you are volunteering and donating and doing great things with your local places, with your special nature reserves and with your communities. But I think we have another specific task now. Many of you will have done this already probably, but all of us have to make the facts about the importance of nature more widely known. And please write to your MP, especially if they're a Norfolk MP. We have a real opportunity here. The Conservative Norfolk MPs do have the ear of Liz Truss. They know her because she's a local MP. She may be your local MP. And MPs do consult their postbag and they do take notice. And so get writing if you can. Politically, there is hope. But we have to win that big argument about the importance of nature, whoever is in government. And we have to go out there and explain to people why we need nature in Norfolk, and why we need not just to protect it, but to restore it and enhance it and increase it. And we have to explain it to everyone, sort of without being self-righteous about it, but including people like bankers and get-rich-quick business people, that we need nature as much as any other living thing in our wonderful planet. I went last night to Hickling, which is kind of almost my local patch, and took the kids on a walk at dusk to go out to Stubb Mill and see the raptors. And the beauty of it sort of almost brought me to tears. It was such a wonderful experience. There were only about 3 other people out there, and we saw loads of pink-footed geese coming over, and we saw muntjac deer up close and bats overhead. And it was so exciting, and marsh harriers coming in, and we didn't see a single crane. And I've been told there's been 60 landing, roosting there at night, which is phenomenal, and what a tribute to that space there. But just as we turned back, and I was saying to the kids, well, I am a bit we've seen everything else, it's been wonderful, we haven't seen cranes. 4 cranes came in right in front of us. And I mean, that alone, what an incredible experience. Aren't we fortunate here in Norfolk to have wonderful places, to have them protected? And I thank everyone at Norfolk Wildlife Trust for protecting them and working so hard on ensuring they flourish. And they will flourish, whatever bad stuff happens with our climate. Nature reserves are the gift that keep on giving. They're resilient, they will change, but nature will continue to find those spaces. And so there is always hope, so we mustn't despair. I will stop talking there, and I'm hoping that we might have results of voting in, but I haven't seen them come through quite yet. So I think we will go next to another short film, and this is a lovely film about the recipient of this year's Sidney Long Medal. And probably not to your surprise, it also features the wonderful Nick Aitchison, our brilliant ambassador. Did you know he's got a book coming out next year? The Meaning of Geese, it's called. It's absolutely fabulous read. And so I'm sure we'll be hearing much more from Nick. But here is a short film. I hope our friends at My Voice can cue it up, and it will reveal the winner of this year's Sidney Long Medal. I think it's coming any minute now.
Sidney Long was a Norwich medical doctor who worked both at the Norfolk and Norwich and Jenny Lind hospitals. But in his heart, he was a naturalist and a conservationist. He served for many years as an officer of the historic Norfolk and Norwich Naturalist Society, and in 1926 he was the lead actor in the foundation of Norfolk Naturalists Trust that we know today as Norfolk Wildlife Trust. In honour of Sidney Long, the 2 organisations, Norfolk Naturalist Society and Norfolk Wildlife Trust, award the Sidney Long Memorial Medal every 2 years to a Norfolk conservationist and naturalist, someone who has given the best of themselves for the preservation and study of nature in the county. And this year's recipient is Professor Carl Sayer of University College London. Carl, in Norfolk Conservation, you're universally associated with wetlands, with ponds and with rivers. Tell me how you came to be associated with wet habitats.
From get-go, really, from when I was a tiny little boy, I met this old man in the village. Before I could walk, put me on his shoulders and took me around the countryside. And where I lived, there were so many ponds, and the ponds just seemed more mysterious than anything else.
They're your natural habitat, and there's a lovely story about how you became involved with your first significant project, the Glaven River Conservation Group. How did that start?
I would perhaps be classified as a naughty little boy when I was in my teenage years, and I'd be cycling around the Glaven catchment looking for secret places to go fishing. One day I was fishing at Bayfield Lake, and I shouldn't have been there. And then the owner came down, who was of course Robin Coombe, and he told me off, but then said, okay, catch me a trout, bring it up to the hall, and we'll see what we can do with it. And I thought, well, I've got to do what he says. So I managed to catch a trout from the river, put it in a bucket, took it up to the hall. He said, right, come with me. And off we went into the woods. He showed me this otter that we fed the trout to, and it was the sort of start of some otter releases in the 1980s. That was a real sort of formative experience, really. I just thought, this is amazing, I'm part of something here. And then when I finished my PhD and wanted to work back in Norfolk, I wanted to sample shallow lakes, including Bayfield Lake. So I knocked on the door and said, hello, Mr. Coombe, can I survey your lake, please? And of course he said yes, and we had a lovely chat. And then about 6 months later, I said, should we form a River Glaven conservation group? And he was just massively on for that. It was just the words he wanted to hear at that moment. And so with others, we formed this River Glaven conservation group. And I then sort of at the first meeting, I think I revealed to him I was that naughty little boy that he had caught. And he laughed his head off, you know.
Knowing Robin, he'd have appreciated the fact that you'd been the naughty boy. On your list of ambitions, what's the next frontier for Professor Carl Sayer in the Norfolk landscape?
No, I mean, you never know what's coming up next, do you? Because I'll often find a species and think that needs some help, and then you just get passionate about it, like the Crucian carp. I'm working on the eel at the moment, which also needs lots of help. I have a sense, given just how many ponds there are in Norfolk and just how important they are, and there's so much to discover scientifically about the seed banks and how things survive in the sediments of ponds for so long, I have a sense I might be stuck in ponds and working on ponds for the rest of my life.
Well, it's an enormous amount that you and your many colleagues have achieved, and Norfolk's conservationists are very grateful to you.
Thank you.
Professor Carl Sayer, on behalf of the Norfolk and Norwich Naturalist Society and Norfolk Wildlife Trust, in recognition of your lifetime of work towards the conservation of the Norfolk environment, Norfolk's biodiversity, and in particular our rivers and ponds, congratulations on receiving the Sidney Long Memorial Medal.
Thank you so much, really appreciate it. I feel really privileged to get this award. It's absolutely brilliant. I'm just a tiny pawn in a much bigger machine, really. You can't do good conservation without landowners, so just a huge thank to all the wonderful landowners, especially Richard Waddingham, whose farm we're standing on now, whose work entirely inspired me. All I'm really doing is putting his ideas into action. Just a huge, huge thanks.
Oh, that's great, isn't it? Lovely to see Carl there, and he's doing some brilliant work with our team at Watering Farm and Mere Farm. And I should thank our brilliant media team for putting together those extremely good videos. Thank you, guys. That was great. We do have some results in now as well. So this is the big formal bit. I'm going to go to my other screen and I'm going to read out the results resolution by resolution for you all. So if you just bear with me, I'm just going to go here. So these are the voting results for Norfolk Wildlife Trust Annual General Meeting 2022. Resolution 1, minutes of the AGM held on 14th of October 2021. We had 640 votes for and no votes against. So that resolution 1 is passed. Resolution 2, reports and accounts. We had 641 votes for and 0 votes against. So resolution 2 is passed. Resolution 3, reappointment and remuneration of auditors. We had in total 641 votes for and 4 votes against. So resolution 3 is passed. Now I'm just going to read out the next resolutions of the appointments of our brilliant candidates, and I'm just going to read out the votes there, the total votes, and at the end I'll just confirm who is elected and who isn't. So resolution 4, the appointment of Alice Liddle. Total votes for 624. Resolution 5, the appointment of Andy Clark. Total votes for, 621. Resolution 6, the appointment of Scott Pinching. Total votes for, 577. Resolution 7, the appointment of Greg Beaton. Total votes for, 599. The appointment of Kirsty David. Total votes for, 566. The appointment of Ross Jolliffe. Total votes for, 562. The appointment of Mark Little. Total votes for, 560. If you bear with me a moment, I've just got to go through and check the numbers on all of those. I think what we might do, I think it would be quite a good idea, while I don't mean to leave you in suspense, but I just want to make sure that I'm getting this correct when I read it out. I think it'd be a good idea if we just move to the questions before I finish reading them out, because there's for and against, so I just need to double check the maths. Does that sound okay, rest of panel? Yeah, okay. So if we just move to questions for a minute. So if we go through some of the the questions that have come through in advance, we've got the first question is about the Norwich Western Link Road. I'm going to read out the question, and then Elliot or Alice will respond, whoever, or Lindsay, whoever is appropriate. We're going to go through the questions that were asked in advance first, and then we'll go through some of the chat questions. So on the Norwich Western Link Road, question here: whilst I understand entirely the NWT resistance to the Norwich Western Link Road, I'm concerned at the lack of apparent understanding of what are the alternatives. For example, huge protests over the extension of the M3 through Lower Winchester in Hampshire, and all claims of damage to the environment from protesters. In fact, 3 years after the completion of Twyford Gap, route pollution levels were less than 60% of pre-motorway levels, and the ground had recovered. Would the same apply here? Research? I think, Elliot, that's probably one for you.
That's right. Do you want to do the other one on the Western Link as well, Patrick? And then we can take those two together.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there's a question too on the Western Link too, from another member. For a lot of people, the Norwich Western Link Road does not need to be completed. I agree it has to be done with the least impact as possible, but where the completed road will be better for the environment in the long term, as long as it is done to cause the least disruption. The rat run through Ringland Hills is not good for anyone or anything.
So thanks for those members. Great questions. We, on our key message on the proposed route of the Norwich Western Link is that we can't support the current route due to the high impact it's going to have on wildlife. We have to remember that we need to comment and focus on the wildlife impacts. We might have views, I suppose, on the wider transport issues in Norfolk, but our remit is to really focus on the wildlife impacts. So as regards alternatives, that's our remit is wildlife, and Norfolk County Council's remit is providing the transport network. So we can support them and suggest things, but we're focusing really on the I think what would be really quite significant wildlife impacts of the current route. The issue, I think, around the Hampshire example is quite interesting. I think if you talk to Hampshire Wildlife Trust, there was 2 SSSIs that were destroyed, one of their nature reserves that were destroyed when that road was built, and no mitigation was provided. So habitat hasn't been replaced. So I think if you talk to them, they would be still very concerned that actually habitat has been permanently lost. So I think the air pollution issues on these things are very complex. We're not experts in that, so I couldn't really comment. And so we really need to focus on the wildlife impacts. And I think our main focus on the Western Link is the catastrophic impact it's likely to have on what we think is the largest colony of Barbastelle bats in the UK that's been discovered on the route. And we're making those points to Norfolk County Council. We've raised our concerns numerous times and will continue to do so. So thank you for that, Patrick.
Thank you, Elliot. So we have another question on lobbying and policy. Would NWT be prepared to be more forthright and upfront in matters concerning climate change, planning applications, habitat destruction, loss of wildlife corridors, biodiversity, nest sites for swift swallows due to conversions and new builds, etc.? I appreciate the Trust has to work closely and maintain positive relationships with Norfolk County Council, local councils, etc. But as the voice for the endangered future of our wildlife and green spaces, more boldness and strength is required.
Yeah, thank you. And
Elliot.
really, I think you may well have addressed that question in your points that you raised, Patrick. I think and I hope we're doing more of this now. I feel strongly that we need to raise our voice when we see wildlife in danger. It's very clear in our memorandum and articles of association that we have the powers to do that, and it's in our DNA as an organisation. We obviously have to be conscious and of the boundaries of doing that, with not getting party political, and we're very acutely aware of those boundaries and where those lines are. But having said that, I mean, I think we're doing more of this now. I think we're raising our voice in a constructive way, because I think we want to be constructive, we want to work with others, but we will be clear. So I think we're in the process of developing and maybe a new tone of voice around these things, which is possibly more vocal than has been in the past, but also evidence-based and constructive. So we'll continue to do this and keep the questions coming in. And it's really useful to hear. We've heard so much in the last 2 or 3 weeks around people writing into us without being asked, saying, I'm so glad you're speaking out here. And we've had some people actually saying, I'm going to join you because of what you're doing. So it's really bringing people together, the work we're doing in this area.
Thank you, Elliot. Membership. We have a question on membership here. Another early one. Could membership benefits be extended to neighbouring counties or beyond, or at least offering a 50% rate elsewhere? It would take some initial coordination, but surely well worthwhile.
Historically, yeah, it's a really good issue, actually. Historically, we have a slightly different membership model to other wildlife trusts. And so we don't, at the moment, offer membership benefits, for example, or free entry to other wildlife trust members, and that's not reciprocated elsewhere. I think it's something that we do need to look at. We're doing some work at the moment on looking at our membership, looking forwards, how we increase our membership, how we raise more funds from our membership, and that will require us, I think, to look at our membership model and all of these things. I'm not making any commitments to what we're going to do there, but I think the team will be looking at that as a way, I think, to encourage us working more closely with the movement and other members who we know many other members visit Norfolk on their holidays, so do want to take part in our and visit our site. So there's a commitment to look at that, and we'll report back, I think, maybe at the next AGM or as part of our regular articles in turn.
Thank you, Elliot. If you can see me looking slightly distracted, I'm trying to multitask, and you know that old cliche about men not being very good at multitasking. I'm trying to do some sums, some very basic maths, but the figures are being checked at the moment by my voice too, because they're really quite close. So we just need to double check everything. Elliot, another question on reserves. I confess I get frustrated with shut, closed days at Foxley Wood and the opening times at Holme, albeit I have felt unwelcome on occasion. Why? Maintenance carries on at other reserves when they are open. That's another question submitted in advance of this meeting. Foxley and Holme.
Yeah, Foxley and Holme. So Foxley we close 1 day a week. I think it's on a Thursday or Wednesday. I think it's on Thursday. I mean, it's a huge woodland. it requires quite a lot of maintenance as such. And so what the team have decided to do over many years is do the work that's most impactful for our visitors on one day, on that Thursday. So it's a way, I suppose, of minimising the risk to visitors, of making sure that some of the more dramatic works in terms of the tree work is done on that one day. So we keep the dangerous stuff and the visitors apart. I mean, that's the logic of it. I'm quite happy with that, and we do advertise that in advance. I remember myself and I remember going on a cycling trip before I came to work at the Trust, and cycling past Foxley would have been disappointed because it was a Thursday. But hey, I've been lots of times since, and I've realised the dates. So I hope you can understand the logic of that one. And Holme, I'm not sure entirely what this relates to, but we've done quite a lot of work recently. We've had to close the centre for a 16-day period during June. And because we've replaced the road, and those of you who visit Holme regularly, I hope will be pleased that we've resurfaced that road, because it was pretty dangerous to people's suspensions, I think, the way it had got to. So we've invested quite a lot of money in doing that, and obviously it was disruptive, so we closed the centre, but I think the results are positive. It could be that the time of the centre opening is 10 till 5, so maybe the question is, why isn't it more extensive? It's an incredibly busy site, Holme. We have to manage the visitor pressure quite carefully. We've got incredibly sensitive natterjack toad populations, for example, at Holme. So we've really got to make sure that, on such a sensitive site, that we balance the visitors and the wonderful inspiration that you get from the reserve and the beach at Holme with making sure we're supporting the species on the site.
Thank you. So we have another question, which is a kind of Foxley-ish question, which is, what is the Trust going to do or doing to replace trees which have died of disease, e.g. the ash trees? There's obviously a lot of young ash in that regenerated woodland at Foxley that's died off.
Our view is that we want to encourage natural regeneration as a key policy. Really, we're only going to plant trees if it's absolutely necessary. That's what we're doing. So we're encouraging that natural regeneration in the enclave that we've purchased next to Foxley, for those of you who've been down there. And the reason for that is, I think, is around the success we get there, and it's stronger and more tolerant. The results, the trees are just more tolerant when they naturally regenerate. We're also finding that we're seeing some signs of resistance to ash dieback in some areas. So it's very, very early stages. I know there's an incredible amount of research happening, but there's maybe a glimmer of hope in some areas where we're seeing, some ash not be affected to the same degree. So that's our policy on those things. We'll let nature take care of it, in essence.
Thank you, Elliot. And of course, our lovely backdrop is Ashwellthorpe, which is the home of ash dieback and also the home of resistance, where the first resistant trees have been found. And I certainly feel personally that actually the deadwood is very advantageous to many things, and ash trees are very genetically diverse, and they're going to be okay, I think. But that's just my personal view. And we've got a good question on governance here. Elliot and Alice, what steps is the board taking to build diversity, equity, I assume they mean equality, and inclusion into its governance and strategy? Diversity, equality, and inclusion. What steps is the board taking?
Do you want to take the governance one, Alice, and then I'll do the wider piece?
Yes, absolutely. We have a governance review group. We meet regularly, and equality, diversity, and inclusion is very much on the agenda, and we will focus on it even more in the coming year. Just for instance, when we put the advert out asking for expressions of interest for applications to become a trustee, we try to make it clear that everybody from every background is welcome to apply. On the board, we have a range of ages. There are 5 women on the board, for instance. I think our youngest trustee is 22. But we will strive to do more. And EDI is something that not only is something that we want to focus on in the board, but within the whole trust. And we just want to reach out with accessibility for everybody, really. So whether that's people working for the trust, the trustees, but we'd like to understand more about how we can be more inclusive and more accessible to members and volunteers as well. So ideas, always welcome. And it's a really serious point that we are considering seriously.
Yeah, I think that I just want to add to that, Alice. Thank you. It's really clear. The reason we're doing this is not because it's flavour of the month or something that we feel we have to do. It's because I think we'll be more impactful as an organisation if we better reflect the communities in Norfolk, which have great diversity within them. We're not just talking about racial or ethnic diversity. There's many aspects of diversity, and I think it really challenges us when we think about this, because to think about this, we have to understand something about the places where people come from and their views and perspectives. It requires us to stand in their shoes, and actually that enriches our experience and understanding as an organisation, and how we can communicate about nature with different communities and audiences. So I think it's fundamental. We've got some new resources, so we've got a great new member of staff on this who's really energetically building the capacity in the organisation. So very exciting times ahead, hopefully, here.
Thank you, Elliot. I'm going to get to the questions in the chat now, and we're going to try and go through them fairly quickly, because I'm sorry if it looks like I haven't been listening, but I've been just checking Jake's arrived in his office and etc. So Jake is kind of ready now to deliver his talk, which I'm sure will be brilliant. But we'll just get through all the questions. I'll then announce the results of the elections, and then we'll get to Jake. So Elliot, just quickly, there was a final one beforehand, which is, why is this AGM online? This should be an opportunity for members to meet one another and staff members.
Very good question. What we decided to do this year was to stick with the online, because we thought we'd get more engagement from more members. I think we've got 4 times as many people voting this year than we've had before. We've got twice as many people attending as we've had before. So I think that shows that we can. I think we could do more. I'd like to have hundreds of people at these kind of things if we make them engaging events. So this is a start. It doesn't mean that I think we're considering what we might do as a sort of members' day for that connection, because we also feel that's important. We understand that some people liked that, and we liked that as well, because it gives us an opportunity to really talk to our members. So we are thinking about doing something. But the reality is, if we did a members' day, we'd want to have it in the summer, and we want to have it, outside somewhere on one of our reserves. So it's in the thinking for next year, and so we'll report back as we go if we come up with a plan for that one.
Thank you, Elliot. Right, on to some questions in the chat. Our friend John Snape, Vice President. Hello, John. Thank you for joining us. John asks, I'd like to know what precautions are being planned against vandalism at the proposed new centre at Sweetbriar. I'm hugely enthusiastic about Sweetbriar, but fear it might be very vulnerable.
I mean, let's do these quite quickly.
Yeah.
What we'll do on these, if we don't get through them, is we'll send out a written sort of responses next week or before the end of next week on some of these if we don't get through them. In brief, we'll work with the communities around, so hopefully we'll build a sense that they have a stake in the site. I think when you do that, the research shows that there's less likely to be any antisocial behaviour. There may be some. It's something that is the nature of an urban site. So we'll get our staffing to the right level. We'll work with communities so they understand the impacts. And hopefully if we have the community people on board who can be advocates of the site, then there's less of that happening. But we have to go on that journey.
Thanks, Elliot. I like these quick fire answers. This is good. We'll get through them fast. Sue Taplin, we were at the launch of the Norfolk Dark Skies project. Can we work in partnership with them?
I think that was the one that was at Cley a couple of weeks ago, wasn't it? So I wasn't there, and I'm not most up to date on what that project is. So I think that's probably one we'll have to come back to with an answer. But my general point of we'd want to collaborate with anyone and everyone who wants to do the right thing for nature probably stands. It's often around the level of resource that we have and how much we need to focus. But I'll come back to you on that one soon.
Question from David North. Hello, David. Thanks for your question. Elliot, when will a Wilder Norfolk strategy be available for volunteers and members to read, comment on and add to?
That's just a resource issue. We've got limited resources in our PR on comms team, and I'm a limited resource, so it's on the list to get a nice kind of PDF pamphlet, probably 3 or 4 pages to do. So I'd hope we'd get that out by Christmas.
Belinda Clark asks, it's another Sweetbriar question. This site sits alongside Briar Chemicals, who are hopefully also key stakeholders in this exciting plan. Can you tell us more about the relationship with them as well, please?
So we haven't got a relationship with them at the moment. We hope, and when we were discussing this a couple of days ago, we put some actions in place to develop links with the companies and corporates around the site. So that's the Sweetbriar Industrial Estate and others. They will be one of those. Clearly their aims may be different to our aims, but in the context of working with people, understanding different perspectives, we'll see where that relationship goes.
Sue's just come back on the Dark Skies thing. Sue says it was yesterday and the Batman was there. Thank you. There are many benefits to wildlife of Darker Skies. I'm
intrigued now about the Batman
last night. Roisin Murray asks, she's got a question for you, Lindsay, for the Treasurer. And her question is, how concerned should we be on current challenges on finances, e.g., how do we pay for all that we want to do?
Yeah. Okay, so as I touched on in my presentation, NWD has very good reserves. There's no denying, I think, that there has been uncertainty around income streams, especially in relation to agri-environmental income, with political changes, etc. So one of the key elements of the strategy is a long-term funding plan, which Elliot and his team are putting together. So that will tie in the finances to what we want to achieve and that impact that we need to have.
Thank you, Lindsay. Okay, so that's all the questions. I'm now going to move to the results. I'm sorry to keep everyone sort of hanging on this. I just wanted to double check the results of resolutions 4 to 10 and make sure that I had everything right. But so just to confirm here, I would like to confirm that Alice Liddell, Andy Clark and Scott Pinching are re-elected and Greg Beaton is elected. So Kirsty, Ross and Mark, thank you so much for standing. You had a heroically large vote. You're not elected this time, unfortunately, but thanks so much for putting yourselves forward, and I hope that we can take advantage and use and your talents and work with you in the coming weeks and months. It's really much appreciated. Everyone received the kind of votes that local councillors would go green with envy for. So thank you. I feel like democracy is alive and well amongst Norfolk Wildlife Trust members. Thank you all. I'm not gonna go and I'm not going to allow a quick break because we are running late. Jake Fines has entered the building. He's joined us in Ashwell-Thorpe Woods, fresh from some black tie event in London. I will introduce him again. Jake's going to talk for about 20 minutes and then we'll have 10 minutes or so for questions. Again, you can add your questions to Jake in the chat. And so I hope we'll be finished by 8 o'clock. I feel like 2 hours is certainly long enough online, but thank you everyone. Almost everyone has stayed here despite us running late, stayed here for Jake. Jake is Conservation Director for the Holcombe Estate, 28,000 acre estate in Holcombe, and he's the manager of the largest terrestrial nature reserve in England. And he's a brilliant manager of land and wildlife. He farms wildlife. He did it brilliantly in South Norfolk before moving up to Holcombe in 2018. This year he's written and published a book, Land Healer, which really reveals a vision, but it's also a very pragmatic and achievable vision. And Jake's a wonderful person. He's much more famous than his actor brothers these days, but you wouldn't know it because he's got time for everyone. He sits on virtually every environmental committee in the country. He's one of the very few people who are kind of welcomed with open arms by Taliban farmers, as they're known, you know, the hardcore of the NFU, and he's also welcomed by wildlife charities such as ourselves. And so it's an absolute pleasure to have Jake here tonight. Thank you, Jake, for rushing back straight from the London train to Kings Lynn, driving at breakneck pace to get online in North Norfolk. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. So it feels so grand calling you Mr. President. Thank you very much. Sorry, I literally have just arrived back from London, speaking to the Guild of Agricultural Journalists, who this is going from one extreme to the other. I do have a presentation, and Mariam, who I can see but is there. Mariam, have you got that presentation available? Do you want me to share my screen?
I think, Jake, it'll be powered up automatically, I hope. Thea, if you could do that.
Wow, the wonders of technology. Love it, love it. Okay, so Patrick's been overly generous in his comments about what I do. All I do is try to make a difference, and I am very lucky to oversee the day-to-day management of the Holcombe National Nature Reserve, which is significantly important. And at an event we had this week with Tony Juniper celebrating 70 years of the first designation of a National Nature Reserve, which is crucially important because National Nature Reserves are the only designation which is purely for nature. They have three primary purposes, and that is nature, science, and people. And all of the other designations, and I don't know whether you're aware of, you know, the SSSI or the National Park or the Area of Outstanding National Beauty or the Ramsar or SAC, SPA, none of them actually are dedicated to nature apart from National Nature Reserves. So it's a real honor for me to oversee one of the largest and without doubt the largest privately owned. So nature reserves play a really significant role in some of the principles of the Lawton report that was published in 2012 or 28, can't remember precisely. And it talks about being better, bigger, and joined up. So Holcombe National Nature Reserve is bigger. Hopefully we've made it better, and it needs to be joined up. And it needs, you know, it's flanked by the National Nature Reserve of Scalt Head and also the National Trust Land to the east. But fundamentally, we need to join, you know, and then following on to Cley, which is really important to you guys, RSPB at Titchwell. But we need to join these up. And everything that I'm about is let's go for some of the low-hanging fruit. And from my perspective, the low-hanging fruit is agriculture. 72% of the land use in the UK is agriculture. 40% of habitable land around the globe is in agriculture. Agriculture has been significantly detrimental to our ecosystems, habitats, and species over the past few decades, and it has a real opportunity to readdress the balance. A lot of my talk today with agricultural journalists was actually, I think you guys have the potential to create significant change. So what, since my arrival in November 2018 at Holcombe, I've taken Holcombe on a journey on how Holcombe can make best use of its 25,000 acres. Thank you, Patrick, for giving another 3,000 acres to Lord Leicester, but it's only 25,000 acres. and how I can demonstrate to Holcombe internally, but also externally, what we can do with some of our farmland where we can make space for nature. And we have I was given 100 hectares effectively to do what I felt was fit. And the image you see in front of you is the area called Great Farm. Great Farm is to the west of Holcombe, just west of Burnham Market. It's 100 hectares, which is the average size of a British farm. It was in intense agriculture, short rotation, lots of roots, no livestock, hedges short back and side on an annual basis. So what could we do to this farm to demonstrate to Holcombe and to others what the potential of our agricultural land is? We know we need to produce food. We know we have a global population close to going to be close to 9 billion by the middle of the century. So we know we need to produce food, but can we produce food that is sustainable, economic, environmental, and is fit for purpose? I believe we can. So Great Farm is a demonstration for this. And here is an example of Great Farm this summer in its full glory. And it's taken 2.5 years to get it to this full glory, where you've got hedges flanked with hay meadows, where we've lost like 97% of our hay meadows in the last 70 years. Hedges that aren't short back and size, but make space for white throats, black caps, yellow hammers, and grey partridge, a species that we've seen a 97% decline in our landscape over the last 50 years. Next slide, please. Do I do that? Is that me? No, there we go. So within these landscapes, what do we have that is quintessentially English? And no other country across the globe has this. It's the hedgerow. We have more miles of hedgerow in the UK than we have sealed roads. Over 500,000 miles of hedgerow. And if we look at the wonderful examples of Knepp Castle that many of you might be aware of, where some of the species that we have seen significant declines, like the turtle dove and the nightingale, they benefit from a particular type of habitat. And that habitat is scrub. And effectively, our 500,000 miles of hedgerow are scrub. And we just need to let them breathe. We need to give them space. We need to let them do what they want to do. I'm not for any one moment thinking we're not going to manage them at some point, because the importance is a wonderful word that Paul Dolman from the UEA uses, and I've stolen his brilliant word, which is called heterogeneity. And we need heterogeneity within our landscapes. And that is effectively a range of different structures sitting alongside each other. So we need hedges periodically to be coppiced. They might be lightly trimmed, or they might be left, and we might let them turn into sort of more woody, tall growth. But our hedgerows are a key component. They are the most important natural capital element of our farmland, following soil. So we mustn't forget the soil, because the soil is what produces our food. The amount of biodiversity within 1 square metre of soil probably outperforms the UK population. So soil first and foremost, and thereafter it's hedgerows. Next slide, please. And then there are areas within the farm landscape, and every farm is different. I spoke to a dairy farmer a couple of weeks ago who had 100 acres, and he said, how much of my farm do I need to put to nature? And I can't give you that answer, because you should know your farm. You should know every field and where it produces food and where it doesn't. But invariably, there are parts of the farm that are so important. And here in this slide, this is just a farm track which has bare ground. It has some of the early colonizing species like mayflower and poppy. But it's a really important foraging site for many invertebrates, for many birds, and some of the early colonizers. So we mustn't disregard some of these farm tracts and these areas that the farm just used to access the land to produce food as really important places for nature as also. Next slide, please. So moving on from that, so the hedgerow, the farm tracts, the the copses, the ponds, whatever we have within our farm landscape, fundamentally, it's all about edge. And it was wonderful to hear from Dr. Pete Brotherton, who is the Director for Science and Climate Change at Natural England, who wrote the Lawton Report, or a significant part of it, where he talked about edge. Edge is something that I talk about too often, but edge, from my perspective, is where two habitats collide. And if you're a fisherman and where the cold water meets the warm water, invariably that's where there's the most abundance of fish. And this same process happens across the natural world. So where you have areas of grazed grassland or wet mud or water or dry mud, it's where nature really starts to interact and it starts to be prolific, and it produces an abundance of life that then, you know, those of you that remember the pyramid of life, where we started off with invertebrates and we work our way up to top predators, this is where this whole process starts. So edges are a really important component to our natural landscapes, and we need to be aware of that. We need to be aware of processes where you start a process. Now, whether that's the coppicing of a woodland, the cutting of a reed bed, the cutting of a hay meadow, the ploughing of an arable field, should that take your fancy, or it's the long-term ambition of a woodland that might have a 150-year cycle. So you're starting these processes, and whether we choose to restart them or let them go prolonged and extend themselves, because they will invariably deliver a range of benefits to the natural world. Next slide, please. So everything that I talk about is trying to integrate and trying to understand some of the benefits that agriculture historically has given us. Yes, we saw an escalation in agriculture between the 70s and the 90s. I think, from my perspective, I think agriculture is changing, definitely with the government's 25-year environment plan and the ambition to pay farmers to deliver ecosystem services or public goods, those being clean water, healthy soils, health and well-being, vibrant nature, to name a few. But I think that the cattle that graze the Holcombe National Nature Reserve, they are my wildebeest, because I know they produce methane, but actually so do the wildebeest and the elk, the wildebeest of the Serengeti and the elk of the Yellowstone National Park. They also produce wildebeest. But as long as I can utilize them in a way that is beneficial as opposed to detrimental, I think they can be part and parcel of the restoration of our farm landscapes, our natural landscapes, and the 800 cattle that graze the 1,000 hectares of wet grassland on the Holcombe National Nature Reserves are the key ecosystem drivers for making that functional, for making that deliver a wide range of benefits to a wide range of species. If I look at in the few years that I've been at Holcombe, we've seen our lapwing population back to what it was in 2000. We've seen 3 successive years of record breeding populations of avocet. The spoonbill population has doubled in size. Bearded tits populations have trebled. Reed bunting populations are record-breaking year on year. Yet Cetus warbler has returned because we focused on natural systems that have benefited through agriculture, as opposed to agriculture having a detrimental impact on what we do. Next slide, please. So it has to happen on a whole farm approach. It cannot be, we cannot sideline nature to the corners of fields. Nature needs to be integrated on our system, and there's this wonderful phrase called nature-based solutions, which I know what that means. You guys might know what that means, but if I speak to a farmer and say, let's talk about nature-based solutions, she hasn't a clue what I'm talking about. And one example, and here is a prime example, one example is something which are called cover crops or cash crops. And these are crops because what's the first thing nature does when you expose soil? The first thing nature does is it wants to cover itself. And if we can mimic that in our farm processes, we can actually see benefits for food production, but also benefits to nature. So here we have a classic example of a cover crop. When I arrived at Holcombe, the cover crops were monoculture, and we've now the farm has now embraced multi-species cover crops, because when you walk across a hay meadow, it's not just oxeye daisies and cocksfoot, it's actually a range of species, and that's what makes it functional. So we're trying to mimic nature in the way we produce food. Now, these species also, from the farm perspective, they're soil healing, and we know if we've got healthy soils, we can produce healthy, nutrition, high yielding food, but they also have other benefits, which are benefits to biodiversity. And in some of the work we've done at Great Farm, where we look at cover crops that are autumn drilled or cover crops that are spring drilled, we're actually already starting to identify from a food production perspective, but also from a nature perspective, that actually the summer ones benefit greater all round. And these are some of the learnings that we want to take to government, because government are looking to develop their environmental land management schemes, fingers crossed. And if we can look at farm systems that benefit both nature and food production, we can, it's a win-win. So it has to be a whole farm approach. We can't sideline nature to the corners of unproductive fields, because nature doesn't operate like that. Nature needs to move through landscapes. Next slide, please. So we can change our farm systems. We can be nature-friendly farming network. We can be regenerative. We can be restorative. We can be agroecology. We can be organic. We can be wilding, rewilding, whatever you want to call it. But actually, sometimes we just need to look back at the past. And here I have a most amazing meadow that gives me deep joy that not many people get to see, apart from the few very close friend of mine. And it's called the Burrows. And 10 years ago, this was an arable field. It's now a species-rich calcareous grassland. And when I arrived, it was following a prescription which was cut and remove. And cut and remove between the 15th of July and the 15th of August. And I challenge that, because I think that calcareous chalk grassland historically was grazed in the winter by a small number of sheep, because it was the drier, lighter soil where the sheep could maintain their weight in preparation for lambing. And they wouldn't put too much weight on, and they wouldn't get foot rot. So I changed the way we manage this new creation of meadow. And there was a key indicator species for how this meadow was performing, and one of them was orchids. And the orchid count, before I changed the way we managed the meadow, the orchid count was about 190. And I said, I don't want to cut and remove to produce a product that is no good for the farm and they can't utilize, so they effectively let the bales rot. I want to bring sheep back into the equation. I want to go back to some traditional management techniques. So we changed the grazing regime. We stopped cutting and removing, and we grazed in October, not farming by dates, but when we thought the sheep were ready to come onto the meadow field, and we started to graze it with the sheep in the autumn. And when we felt the sheep had done their job, we then removed the sheep. Within 2 years, we saw the orchid population go from 190 to in excess of 2,000. This year, coincidentally, because this very special meadow sits next to an ancient hill fort, which is home to Norfolk's largest population of chalk hill blue butterflies. And this year, which was because of the prolonged drought and the little rain and little impact of butterflies, we've actually seen the chalk hill butterflies, which historically were only on about a population of about half a dozen across this 30-acre field. This year, we saw the chalk hill blues literally across the whole field in their hundreds, if not thousands. So we start to see the benefits of some of these processes, these historic management processes of agriculture that can provide benefits. Next slide, please. So unintended consequences. Unintended consequences could be a good thing. We've got a wonderful Natterjack toad on the left. And if I look at an example of processes that I referred to earlier, where the toads that overwinter in the sand dunes at Holkham have been monitored since 1956 with a series of rather sad little ponds that were probably remnants of the bombing in the war. And the population had bumbled along a rather sort of low population, but there was a previous reserve manager that had created a wetland specifically for avocet, which were close to extinction in the UK. That reserve manager moved on, and he didn't pass on the information for why he created the scrape. The scrape became defunct from a lapwing perspective and started to vegetate up. And 3 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, we discovered that actually, although it became unfavorable for lapwing, a lapwing and avocet, it has now had become favorable for Natterjack toads. And I took Tony Juniper, the chair of Natural England, there, and we estimated there were 150,000 toadlets on this scrape. So it's kind of letting nature do its thing. And I think in due course, it will become unfavorable to toads, but it might become favorable to marsh harrier or bittern or spotted crake or black-winged stilts. So it's kind of starting these processes and not really knowing what things are doing. And the same with the Chalkhill blue, which is a photograph that I love. All these photographs are ones that I've taken. I love it, but it's seemed rather avant-garde from some respects. But Chalkhill blues are very photogenic and dear to my heart. So I recommend anyone who knows the site I'm referring to is well worth having a visit. Next slide, please. So nature has an amazing ability to bounce back. This field here is at Great Farm. It was a field of maize and had been in continuous maize sprayed with horrible herbicides that didn't allow nature to breathe. And we changed the way we farmed it, and we decided to put it into a more nature-friendly. It's only 2 hectares, so actually it's uneconomical to farm. And here we have Viper's bugloss, a most amazing flower that is so important to so many pollinators and bumblebees and hoverflies and butterflies. And the field just erupted in this color of this iridescent blue. I must admit there's a bit of a filter going on there, but it's just to emphasize the amazing ability for nature to bounce back given the space. Next slide, please. So farming can be, so I've waxed lyrical, I think, about the amazing ability for nature to bounce back. But we also must understand some of the damage that is done by agriculture. And here we have a field of late lifted potatoes that wasn't cultivated, and we see the desperate soil erosion that isn't fit for to take quantities of rain and dries out too quickly. Agriculture has and still plays a significant part in the detriment of our environment. There are some wonderful individuals out there doing amazing stuff. Next slide, please. But we also must recognize the damage that it does. Here we have a field of late lifted sugar beet that has been left. You see the green on the soil. That's just mold and mildew. That's a dysfunctional soil. It doesn't drain. The water just sits there. You know, natural environments, take in water. The infiltration ability is phenomenal. Hedges that are short back and sides that aren't fit for purpose. I still see this. I see some wonderful examples, but I also see examples of this that are hugely unbeneficial and serve no purpose. And I think that the 21st century farmer in the UK should deliver a range of services. They should produce food. They might produce health and well-being and access for people. They might produce nature. They might sequester carbon. So we need to look at a range of different approaches. And there's a wonderful book by Henderson published in the 40s, and it's about having a range of different products for your farm, because if one product is the adage is milk high, corn low. So if your milk price is high and your corn price is low, if you've got a range of different services and products you're providing, you start to you spread out your risk for your farming business. So we need to encourage farmers, because this farmer might have yielded very little for his sugar beet crop because the price was, but he could have actually realized an income for biodiversity, for carbon capture. Next slide, please. Do shut me up if I'm going on for too long.
5 minutes, Jake.
So there are some amazing places at Holkham. We've got the Hill Fort in a location on the edge of the estate, but we also have this is the decoy. This is the area where the spoonbills breed. And we go back to the processes. So we have the processes of the wetland that then was favorable for avocet and then became favorable for Natchak toads. This is a duck decoy. This is an area that was hunted for duck a century ago and was created specifically to hunt duck. It's now been let loose and it's slowly evolved. And in 2010, 6 spoonbills decided to make their home and breed, and the 6 spoonbills produced 10 young. We've now seen this population increase to last year we had 45 pairs. Since they started breeding at Holkham, they've produced over 500 young. It's also home to cattle egret, great white egret, close to 200 nesting cormorants, the only nesting colony of cormorants in Norfolk, so I'm led to believe from my colleague Andy Bloomfield. And this is, sometimes we can just let things go and make things happen. So a duck decoy turning into a site that I think is of international importance. It's demonstrating what is possible, and sometimes it's important to just sit back and let nature do what nature wants to do. But invariably, if we set ourselves a target, and already we've decided to do work to extend the decoy, and I'm saying to my team, don't think that in 20, 30, 40 years time, we will have a spoonbill colony of over 200, because nature might decide it doesn't want that. That's not a failure. So don't think if we have, it's just let it do its own thing, because whether the successes of spoonbills or spotted crake or dragonflies or rare aquatic life, or we need to be a bit more relaxed on where we think it's going, because if Knepp Castle, the wonderful example, I don't think they believed they were going to create this amazing habitat for turtle doves and nightingales, but it was just let it breathe, let it happen. Next slide, please. This slide, the poignancy of this slide for me is this is about as rewilding as the Norfolk coast goes. This is in the far distance, you can see an area called East Hills. This is a 40-hectare site of samphire bed. This is the most amazing. This is rewilding long term. So historically, these salt marshes were grazed by sheep, and 100 years ago, they removed the grazing of sheep. We've subsequently had a biodiversity audit carried out along the Norfolk coast to find out that these salt marshes are probably the best example of salt marshes in Europe, because of the range of species that are around. There are You know, we all think there's one type of samphire, but actually there's about 6 different types of samphire. And actually, when you sit long enough and look closely, you can start to identify them. But this is, from my perspective, this is an exemplar of what rewilding is. It's very different than some of the other sites, but it's actually, if we remove some of the intervention from humans and they're wanting to reap some reward from a landscape, it's amazing how nature can become wonderful, rich and diverse. Next slide, please.
2 minutes, Jake. Sorry to interrupt.
No, go for it, Patrick. I'm kind of so the Holkham Natural Nature Reserve, 10,000 acres, visited by 800,000 people in 500,000 cars with 300,000 dogs. From my perspective, it's really important to engage people with nature. Nature also requires tranquility and to be left in peace to do what it needs to do. This was a picture taken by me last year at Lady Anne's Drive in February, where I've got geese and widgeon and lapwing and curlew literally 10 feet or 30 yards, whatever you want to, from the hundreds of thousands of people visiting. And it's really important to engage. There are so many people that are disconnected with nature. You know, we have a huge urbanized population. And if we can have reserves or places where people can actually see nature close at hand. And I know when the individuals that come to Holkham Beach to go and do sandcastle type stuff, and I'm of the firm belief, if I've got calling curlew, displaying lapwing, tens of thousands of geese coming into roost, I actually engage them with nature. So when they get out of the car and the dog's been sick and the children have said for the 19th time, are we there yet? They actually go to the beach and come away and they take something away with them in their subconscious. And, you know, I don't want to force feed nature, but I just want to make them aware of it and see it. Because if we don't see it, we don't value it. And this is the biggest problem. Some of the declines in our bird populations, some of the really easy stuff that we, butterfly populations that we see, people are thinking that, you know, I have 2 children that are in their early 20s, and they think this is the norm. But it was very different when I was their age, because there was probably 3 times as many of everything. So it's really important to make people aware of what we've got, what we've lost, and the ability to bring it back. Thank you very much.
Jake, thank you. Thank you very much. And we have questions coming in, so I'll just crack straight on with questions because I know people have been sat here. Thank you, everyone. It's tremendous. We've almost our entire audience of members has stayed with us for 2 hours of Norfolk Wildlife Trust telly, if you like. So that's brilliant, and a tribute to your fascinating talk, Jake. Ross Jolliffe has a question. Jake, thank you. He says, a most encouraging presentation. You mentioned access a few times, and I think many farmers discourage this. Have you actually faced problems from people versus the environment or even crops? And that's possibly a question for Norfolk Wildlife Trust too, from Ross.
So there is this conflict based on the legislation we currently have. From my perspective, I think we need to, if we look at lockdown, where people were stuck in their houses and would go for their, you know, their Johnson walk, and they would trample across fields, and the fields were invariably wet, and we saw footpaths extend from 2 meters to 22 meters very rapidly, and the farmers pulling their hair out that they were destroying their crop. What an opportunity. What a wonderful opportunity to engage with people. So we just, access can take multiple forms. It doesn't have to be, you know, open access, permissive access. Holkham has permissive access in quite significant acres, but actually we can do educational access. You know, forest schools are really important. Getting the young people out onto our farms, onto our reserves, onto rural places is really important. So we must not be fixated that actually access, because sometimes open access, as I see all too often, can have significant detrimental effects.
Thanks, Jake. Just a quick supplementary question from me. I was very struck last summer when I went to Holkham and saw, summer before last, and saw suddenly that you had massive notices everywhere about dogs, huge new dog exclusion zones on the beach. I actually got told off for having my miniature dachshund off the lead by a very menacing guy, and well, a person I would respect in shades, a big guy in a pickup who was working for Holkham. Can you just tell us briefly about those 300,000 dogs and what you've done to manage them, because they're obviously responsible for a huge loss of ground nesting birds from our beaches?
So I can't deny that Holkham historically promoted the pound, the pooch pound. It has, I think it has the accolade of the most dog-friendly cafe. And there are associated problems with that. So when I started to look at the data for shorebird breeding success, it became very apparent very quickly with on some species an up to 60% decline in their breeding success. So so there's a nervousness with actually telling people what to do, especially when historically they've had access. So I thought the first thing I do is I just need to engage with that demographic. So we put out a survey to people that live, locals, people that live in and around Holkham. We put it on websites, we put it on social media, and we put out this survey, and it ran for 12 weeks. And when you design a survey, sometimes you can actually, the survey will give you the answers you want, depending on how you frame the questions. But effectively, we had over 2,000 responses. And if I look at some of the responses to the National Parks Review that I sat on, which had little over 3,000 responses, to have a small little beach on the Norfolk coast, to have 2,000 responses was quite significant. But they effectively, all of them, whether they're dog owners or non-dog owners or wildlife lovers or birders, or they effectively gave us the mandate to implement seasonal dog restrictions. And the reason you saw these enormous signs was because you have to take people on a journey. Ideally, everyone that arrives knows prior to their arrival there are dog restrictions. And this was quite problematic in year one, when everyone had a bit of a free-for-all. And what we saw when we put the signs up, and so you go on a sign journey, we don't put a sign up of a fluffy little turn chick, because the dog owners ignore that. But if you put, and we even call the sign the fluffy dog sign, where you've got someone walking an adorable little miniature dachshund, they're immediately going to engage in it. And they're going to go, God, I love that. Look, it just looks like Freddie, our dachshund. So they then start to look at it. And then you take them on a journey. And the language just gets stronger and stronger when you become into the more sensitive areas. So we implemented that. And we got this wonderful chirpy chappy called Kevin the Beach Warden to come and approach people. I'm deeply sorry he was wearing shades, but we've changed his truck to something a bit more relaxed, in a sort of utility vehicle. And he's there more to guide people. So where do you want to take Freddie the Dachshund? Well, I can give you a range of options, but actually over here we've got some really important species that have flown halfway across the globe to nest here. And you start to inform them. And what we saw, and we've just done year 2, and we've seen an increase in shorebird breeding success. But what we've seen Freddie's dog owners talking to Percy the Pooch's dog owners, and they're calling them out. So it becomes self-policing. And that's really encouraging. So the locals are really proud, because we, at the end of the seasonal restrictions, we thank everyone and we tell them, we give them the information of what the success has been, because without them, it wouldn't have happened. And they start policing it. They start become our beach wardens. So it's working well to date.
That's fascinating. And well, I hope there's some lessons for NWT there. And I know there's been an exhaustive consultation process at Holm, and hopefully we'll we'll see something there. A question from John Sharp. Thanks, Jake. It's wonderful to hear about all the great initiatives at Holcombe. How receptive to your ideas do you find others in the Norfolk farming community?
So
honestly,
no, honestly, there's not a farmer that I can't speak to. And if I've sat in a lot of farm kitchens. And I don't talk, it's amazing, they all have Argos and Emma Bridgewater.
I love a farm kitchen, yeah.
Can't beat a farm kitchen. I don't go in talking birds, bees and biodiversity because they show me the door rapidly. I talk about economics and efficiency. I talk about their farm business and what they're trying to achieve and their investments. And I then kind of frame it in ways that it could become better and actually potentially there are some incentives for them to do other things. And there's a farmer at Holcombe that had never done any environmental endeavors. And I had this conversation with him. He put 20% of his farm into nature. We then record everything he does. We found species of international importance on his farm. Strangely, it's his wife who is the driver of this, because I tell her when she starts seeing birds as she drives down the farm track, when she starts seeing flowers and butterflies, she's the one that says, this is happening, this is working. So all of the farmers that I speak to, and some of those conversations are challenging, especially, I spoke at the Suffolk Farming Conference, and there's some, these are some high productive, high yielding farmers. And I walk in when there's a conflict going on in Eastern Europe, thinking I'm going to talk about nature. This is going to be a difficult gig. But actually, they were really receptive because they understand about having a business that is rich and diverse. They also understand, I think, that most farmers, although they've been on a treadmill of productivity, slash and burn, spray and remove, they actually miss some of the things that they once saw. I had a farmer close to tears when we implemented some environmental work on his farm, and he came back to me 2 years later and he said, I've just seen a brimstone butterfly. It's the first one I've seen since I was a child on his farm. So they start to take ownership of it. And and they're not, yes, they've been on a treadmill, they've been driven by policy. And actually, I think that most of the farmers, 99% of the farmers I speak to are receptive to change.
There's a question here from Caroline Spinks. It kind of covers what you've already been talking about, Jake, but it's thank you, Jake, for encouraging other land managers to make edges for nature. This will be the last question, by the way, because I'm very aware we've gone well over time. Do you see the momentum building? I'm meeting more farmers talking about nature. Will there be even more going forwards? Are these more imaginative, sustainable ways to farm on the curriculum? I would just add, this is me adding, do you worry that with ELMS being kind of reviewed, that we're going to lose this kind of great opportunity to embed wildlife friendly farming in the financial support system? But Caroline was asking, is momentum building?
So I think momentum is there. So the snowball has started to roll down the hill. You have farmers, and specifically the next generation, who are on board, and they want to do it. And I think, I was speaking to some farmers the other day where ELM, from their perspective, doesn't exist. It's a concept that talks about tests and trials and pilots, but actually doesn't, from their perspective, doesn't exist. But I think that of all of the drip approach from the 25-year environment plan, a paper called Health and Harmony, which discussed how when we exited Europe, we would fund our farmers. Farmers have sort of been, they've started to realize this is something that's going to happen. So it would be, and if I look at some of the backlash from some of the media, and specifically on social media, where there's as many farmers going, actually, 40% of agricultural businesses are in countryside stewardship. There was a 41% increase in uptake in stewardship last year. You know, Secretary of State, listen and look what farmers are doing. They are ready to embrace this. So don't pull the rug from underneath them, because you will get a backlash. So I think the momentum is there. It's happening.
Brilliant. Jake, thanks ever so much. Thank you for racing back from London. I appreciate that was probably quite stressful against a time limit. If we were in a room together, I'm just trying to make sure you can see the book. This is Jake's book, Land Healer. His colleagues on the Nature Reserve now go, here comes the Land Healer, when Jake turns up in his pickup truck, and they mock him. It's a wonderful book. So if we were all together in a room, he'd be signing it, but you can obviously get it from all good bookshops and take it to Holcombe.
You can get it from Clyde.
You can get it from, of course I missed the trick there. Thanks, Jake. Clyde, go to Clyde, get Land Healer, go along to Holcombe. Jake will sign it for you. Thank you ever so much, everyone, for being with us tonight, for voting, for tolerating this online experiment with the AGM. You can go home safe in the knowledge that you have not caught the horrible colds that both Alice and I have, and we would have been spluttering all over the room had we all been in a room together. So that's another benefit. Thank you so much, Jake, for a brilliant talk, really interesting and insightful, very relevant for us here at Norfolk Wildlife Trust. Thank you, Elliot and Lindsay, and thank you to the team at My Voice for sorting out all the voting and scrutinising it. Thank you so much behind the scenes to Marianne and Rachel and the others, and Nick, of course, Aitchison, for making that film and for making all this happen. And thank you most of all to you, the members, for joining us tonight. And hopefully we will see you all on one of our lovely nature reserves around Norfolk somewhere soon. Thank you.